Hi there, Brett here. Welcome to Tabletop Sagas. Let's dive straight into the Blitzkrieg Commander English starter set from Pendraken Miniatures. And today I think we're going to be painting up some armoured vehicles. So let's get started. To start with, we're going to be using the airbrush. It's not quite required for this, as we're just going to be doing an all-over base, but it helps to get the paint on there a lot quicker. For that base, I will be using Vallejo Model Colours Russian Uniform. This colour is apparently perfect for painting British armour in Europe, especially if, like me, you aren't looking to do any crazy camo schemes. Like most of the paints here, the colours that I choose will be based on a great video by Sonic's Sledgehammer Studio. I'll link down in the description below if you want to check out his amazing video on painting British armour. With the base colour down, we're going to put away the airbrush and switch back to the Old Faithful. Now, we just want to pick out the other main colours that we want to have on here before we hit the model with a wash. Those are the wooden parts and the cloth parts. These are only on the truck that comes in the starter set in my opinion, although some of the stowage on the other vehicles could well certainly be painted at this stage as well. For these, I decided to use English uniform for the cloth. My thinking on this one was that if it's good enough for the army's uniforms, then there's a good chance that they would have used either this or a similar coloured fabric for the coverings on their vehicles as well. And for the wood, you can just use whatever mid-tone brown you like best to use for wood. Having done these three base colours, we're flying through these and straight onto the wash. Now for this, I was a little concerned about the larger flat areas on the vehicle. Washers on flat areas have a habit of acting unexpectedly. So to combat that again, I took advice from Sonic and watered down my brown wash. This will mean that it's more subtle and going to end up looking less streaky on the armour plates. However, it will also be less prominent in the recesses as well, although I wouldn't worry about that too much as I didn't find that to be negatively true. And if you do prefer it to be darker, then you can always go back in and add in a second coat of the wash once it's dry if you would like to. With your washes out of the way, we're going to come back to the base colour and re-establish those bases. To do this quickly, I'd recommend breaking out the old dry brushes for this one. Specifically, I just use some cheap makeup brushes that I've gotten from Amazon. For this, you may want to give a bit of a consideration for the brush size that you're using. For the tanks and the armour, you can really go as big as you want, as they're only one colour at the minute anyway, so you can't really go wrong here. Although for the truck, you may want something that is a little bit smaller, as you don't want to be hitting the cloth parts on the back of the truck with the green for the front of the truck. It's not the end of the world if you do hit it though, as you will want to go through and highlight that up separately anyway as well, but it's worth considering that this will mean less cleanup in those later stages. At this point, I did think that the initial highlight was maybe not quite enough, and I would like to create a little bit more definition, so I decided to add some off-white to the Russian uniform base colour and use that as a rough edge highlight. Now, I say edge highlight, but we aren't going to be going through picking out every single edge with a brush. Instead, we'll be using a more dry brushing, but a bit more directed this time. We're just going to aim to hit the sharp corners and edges around the sides of the minis and the turrets on the top. With the main colour done, we can now move on to the details. Let's start by picking out the tyres. For these, I'm going to be using a German grey, which is a really dark, almost black style grey, which we can then come back in and give a black wash to add a bit more depth to that colour rather than just going in straight with a black for the tyres. If, like me, you didn't paint up the stowage before doing the wash, or if you need to tidy it up after doing the dry brushing step, now would be the time to do that. And honestly, it's a really quick one of getting out the brown that you used previously for the wood base, and then a mid-tone metal for any of the metal parts on the shovels and such. And with that, we're done with the actual model themselves for the tanks and the armoured car and the truck, but that doesn't mean that we're done just yet. Moving on to the base itself, just using a simple earth brown colour for the base and then getting a quick wash on there. If you're accurate with your dry brushing, you could have maybe done this at the beginning before we did the washes previously, but it's just as easy to do now, and that way avoid having to do any potential cleanup after the dry brushing. This will be getting covered in other basing materials though, so don't worry too much about the exact colour or neatness here. Once that wash has dried as well, we will go back in and do an extra bit of dry brushing to pick out the details in the dirt texture. I also had the realisation at this point that it would be an excellent opportunity to do some basic weathering on the miniatures, and played pretty loose with my dry brushing. So don't worry about avoiding hitting the bottom of the mini. In fact, you want to be doing the opposite of that, and make sure to hit it, and it will look like mud that's been pulled up and caked onto the bottom of your tanks as they've been driving around the battlefield. In previous videos, this is where I would lean heavily on the Geek Gaming Scenics base ready range, just to coat the bases and get them done nice and quickly, but this time I thought it would be worth trying something a little different. I picked out a few different types of foam flock that I wanted to have a try of. Specifically for this one, I used a mixture of a dark and a medium green coloured foam flocks. I did pick up a brown one as well, but that one I thought was a little bit too stark compared to the greens, so I decided that I would give that one a miss for this project. Using PVA, I gave this a good scattering around the base, not aiming to cover 100% of it, just so that way the earth texture will still show through in some sections. Also, as a bit of advice here, do make sure to pile up this flock higher than you think is maybe sensible. In the next step, this will be getting squished down, and having some bits of thicker clumps at this stage will help you to give extra bit of variation on the base at the end. Once your PVA is dry all the way through, you will pretty quickly notice how fragile this stuff is. Honestly, they might come off if you just look at it in the wrong way, to say nothing for if you actually try to transport it for when you're wanting to play a game. So we will need to get this flock sealed down. The easiest way that I've found to do this though is to grab yourself a pipette and some isopropyl alcohol and drip a little bit of that onto the base. Not much so that it's drowning or anything like that, but enough so that everything gets a bit damp. Also, please, please, please be careful with this stuff. You don't want to be breathing in isopropyl alcohol if you can help it. So make sure to do this in a well ventilated room or outside if you really want to go the extreme route, and also get yourself a face mask. Before you give that ISO a chance to dry, then you want to be coming back in with some watered down PVA or a matte scenic sealant like the one that's sold by Geek Gaming Scenics, or even if you don't have that, you can try making your own at home, which is what I've done here. Drip some of that onto this and the ISO will help pull the glue down into the foam and lock everything into place. Once it's dry, it'll also be all packed down to a more sensible height. One consideration to make here though is that I did find that the foam that I had chosen to use, the colours actually did run and end up blending together. The dark bits ended up getting a little bit lighter and the light bits ended up getting a little bit darker, and it all ended up looking like it was just the same colour anyway. A little bit of a waste, but hey, now I know for in the future. If, like me, you're not completely familiar with World War II tank names and can't tell the difference between a 75mm gun or a 76mm gun, then you might want to consider one final step before calling these models done, and that is to put the name of the tank on the underside of the base. I kind of flipped back and forth on what to use for these, which might seem a little bit of a strange idea, but because I knew that I was going to be using these miniatures for Blitzkrieg Commander, I wasn't sure if I should use the name of the miniature from the Pendraken website or the name of the unit that the model represents in the game. So, for example, on the Pendraken site, the M4A2 Sherman 375mm with turret box and the M4A1 Sherman 75mm with turret box both use the same stat line for the M4 Sherman 75mm. There we go, we've got these all painted up and I'm really happy with how the miniatures came out. I think that for the amount of time that they took and the techniques that we used, really effective figure to put onto your tabletop. I hope you will agree, but let me know down in the comments below what it is that you think of these miniatures. The only thing that I would like to do is I think, like to put on some actual decals and get the tank markings, the squad markings, the bridge weights, things like that put on there as well. But I've got to be honest, the whole what the signs mean, what the numbers mean, and all that sort of stuff is a little bit beyond me just at the minute to be able to do them confidently. I am getting there, and I am starting to wrap my head around it and understand what they mean. So those will be getting picked up soon and put onto these miniatures. I will be sure to do an update for you once I get that done. So that's everything for today. I will throw up some photos for you to check them out in a little bit better detail. As always, if you did enjoy the video, do be sure to hit that subscribe button, comment, like, all the usual YouTube stuff. Honestly, it does really help me out with still being quite a small channel. And I've been Brett, and I shall see you next time.